Everyone loves an underdog story. One unlikely hero going up against the doubters and the naysayers. Taking the helm on a month dedicated to such a character is not for the faint of heart. Anyone can jump on collaborations for Marvel and DC. With December pulling you one way and January the other, it's easy to give into pressure and take part in one of those, if you want to work for the man. I'm Diego Rivera, creator of Spawntember, a month-long celebration dedicated to one of the most wicked characters in comic book history. We're going to be talking comics, TV shows, movies, video games. There's very little that Spawn hasn't had his roasted fingertips on, including myself. What I mean is that Spawn is an integral part of this channel's origin. Scroll far back enough and you'll see that my first video is on the terrible PS1 game Spawn the Eternal. Without Spawn, there is no Diego, and it's time I paid my dues. So let's kick off Spawntember with one of the most highly regarded pieces of Spawn media. The HBO animated show. When I think of Spawn, I don't think of him in the same vein as I do other superheroes like Spider-Man, Superman, or even Batman. This is an adults-only character, alright? This ain't your daddy's Caped Crusader. You know, this is actually my dad's DVD box set. I borrowed it. Hopefully he's not watching. But anyway, growing up I always had this preconceived notion about Spawn because this box set was off limits. So with this thick fog of mystery surrounding this DVD box set, I had years to speculate, man, if the animated show is that mature, the comics must be hardcore. They are not that. Without getting too far into the weeds, the Spawn comics of the 90s are as if a 13-year-old was trying to be cool, dark, and edgy. Some might say to their detriment, but there's no doubting that these comic books had style, and I've come to enjoy their try-hardness in a charming sort of way. But when it comes to the animated show, that violence and grit holds true. If anyone trying to get into Spawn today were to ask me where to start, first of all, I'd say congratulations and welcome. And look no further than Todd McFarlane's Spawn. The series aired on May 16th, 1997 on HBO, and already that was the first sign that this wasn't just another cartoon like Street Sharks or the Snorks. They don't let just any cartoon be on the home box office, mind you. There's a level of quality that's to be expected. Before the show starts, the audience is warned that this is not for kids, to say the least. While anime was known to push the boundaries of violence found in animation, Western animation still had a prejudice that they were just for kids. That's not the case here. Guns, blood, drugs, sex, foul language, it's all on the table here. And it made the show that much more memorable. Todd McFarlane's Spawn goes for a vision that completely differentiates it from the one found in the comics. Open up one of Spawn's books and you'll find a hodgepodge of elements from different genres. Sci-fi, fantasy, horror, team-ups with Harry Houdini trying to uncover a mystery, dealing with nuclear bombs and Russian gangsters. Needless to say, they weren't afraid to get silly. It's also easy to forget that Spawn is part of a bigger Image universe, crossing over with the Youngblood and Savage Dragon. These crossovers with other characters make Spawn feel like a more traditional superhero, at least in the early issues. The animated show decides to do away with all of that and put Spawn where he is suited best. Violent crimes with psychopaths, serial killers, and corrupt government officials. All enveloped in a red cloak of supernatural horror. Like in any comic book, a hero is not complete without his or hers rogues gallery, and Spawn is no exception. But rather than having a forgettable cast of villains used to test Spawn's morality, the show goes for a more grounded approach for Spawn's adversaries. You won't find goons like The Curse, a rich religious fanatic obsessed with the war between heaven and hell, that uses his wealth to make himself a power suit. Or Cygor, another cybernetically enhanced foe. He was once Al Simmons' partner who was experimented on, a project that tried to combine the intellect of man with the brawn of ape. A lot of these guys feel uninspired, and some of them don't even stick around long enough to really make an impact. The animated show is more urban, dealing with insane serial killers like the one found in Season 2 in the episode Send In the Clowns, but clowns is spelled with 3 Ks. You can see where this is going. This guy claims to be doing the Lord's work when he goes around New York City kidnapping black people and killing them in an old cellar. It's very David Fincher's Seven, where seeing these twisted characters carry out their gruesome agendas makes you feel like taking a shower once the episode is done. To contrast that, there's also an issue in the comics that deals with the KKK, but it takes place during a time where Spawn is on a long trek back to New York City from Alabama, after being teleported back to Earth from heaven, so his suit is all out of whack, and technically he can teleport back to New York City, but he's keeping an eye on his necroplasm counter. It's a whole thing. The Klan is trying to kill the last black family living in this county, and Spawn intervenes by turning their leader into a black man, and leaving him for his own members to turn on him. And not to say that one story is done better than the other, but the one in the comics feels like a random offshoot, whereas the one in the animated series feels more tonally in line and consistent with the rest of the show, and stays within the theme of corruption and sadism in the back alleys of Rat City. It almost makes the city a character in itself, being a vessel for the evil and filth of New York City to flow through. The animated show has a way of streamlining plot elements from the comics that just makes the whole story flow a lot better. Like the mystery behind Al Simmons' murder. We don't spend 50 issues trying to figure out who it is. Was it Chapel? Was it this other lady? Why did Jason Wynn give the order? In the animated show, boom, it's Chapel. Done. It works, with Chapel having a personal connection with Al Simmons, and then Spawn tormenting him with the guilt. And again, the show just kind of streamlines the whole vibe of Spawn and focuses on one genre, right? Supernatural horror. To give you another example, eventually in the comics, Spawn infiltrates Jason Wynn's building. But the way he does it is kind of silly, where he disguises himself as one of his guards, and it looks kind of silly. In the show, it's treated a lot better. Again, it goes for horror, where Spawn infiltrates the building, but he's in the shadows, he's pulling in guards with his chains, covering them with his cape, and he's treated very much like a slasher. And when you pitch the idea of Spawn, where he's this undead zombie ghost from hell with supernatural powers, in my opinion, it's almost natural to go, okay, boogeyman in the shadows, rather than action hero that does all these silly things like, team ups with Harry Houdini again. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I love Spawn using guns. I think that should be an innate part of Spawn, just because it looks so damn cool. But leaning into boogeyman in the shadows rather than action hero is the way to go, in my opinion. When bringing the show to life, the artist will go for a look that will go hand in hand with the tone of the show. A look that drenches and obscures his characters in shadows. This style just works so well with Spawn, and it's interesting comparing it to the style in the comics, where artists like Todd McFarlane himself and Greg Capullo just have no secrets about Spawn. They showcase this guy in beautiful 2-page splashes just oozing with color, blazing fires, green necroplasm just bursting out of the page. I mean, this guy is cool. I mean, who wouldn't show him off? But I might argue that obscuring Spawn in shadows and keeping him as a silhouette with 2 green eyes peering through the darkness might look even cooler. I know my boy Toddy Mac agrees.
The best shots, can I say the best shots in HBO are the ones where Spawn is 90% black, a little bit of red rimming him. You see the eyes, his head's black, his cloak is back, he's standing in front of something black, and you pull back and you just barely see him in the shadow. Like,
in season 1, we get Spawn in decent lighting that let us see his costume and details, but as the show goes on, he starts to become more cape than man, as his cloak stretches out across the screen, enveloping any scum that dares to trespass his alleys. This art style does favors for characters like Overkill as well, the cybernetically enhanced mercenary hired by Tony Twist to take out Spawn. You'd imagine that this more sci-fi-esque character would stick out like a sore thumb, but keeping him in the shadows makes him work. Even when he faces off against Spawn in this battle that lights up the alleys with blazing fires and muzzle flashes while still keeping those heavy blacks, except they're now highlighted with oranges and yellows, and it just looks so damn beautiful. In my opinion, this show came to be defined by its more mature and violent take on Spawn. But if that's the case, the art style has to be a close second. And if you turn off your lights like Todd asked you to right before the episode starts, then it'll be like the borders of your TV just completely disappear, and you're immersed in the darkness of Spawn. Hey, Peter. Who should we get to voice Spawn?
Keith.
Damn right. Now, obviously, I already know that Keith David voices Spawn in the animated show. But when I open a Spawn comic and I see that his speech bubbles have this thick gray border demanding someone with a certain intensity to their voice, I'd like to imagine that it was just Keith David in my head all along, before the animated show was even a thing. He has that intimidation that demands for you to cut your shit, but also a welcoming warmth when talking to characters like Cyan. But above all, the one thing that is always present in Spawn's voice is torment. The constant pain of the hell he is lost in with no way out. It's felt in every piece of dialogue Keith delivers.
Hello.
I want my mommy.
You go to your mommy now. She'll take care of you. You're gonna be all right now.
He is what Kevin Conroy is to Batman, what Mark Hamill is to the Joker. There'll be other voice actors that do a commendable job. The guy from Spawn Armageddon wasn't bad.
It was easy. You're my bitch.
But there'll always be that guy at the top that defined the characters for a lot of people. And it's a treat that we still get him in stuff like Mortal Kombat 11, even today. A lot of the voice actors in this show deliver their lines in a sort of a whisper. Usually in animation, it calls for heightened emotion to compensate for the lack of acting you would do with your face in live action. But a lot of the voice actors' performance here are kinda subdued, and have a bit of an echo to them, as if they're talking in a long, empty hallway. I don't know if this was intentional, but the melding of the very real-world violence and the supernatural elements that come with Spawn, it can come off as corny if not executed properly. But there's something about the subtlety of the dialogue and the way it's mixed that when combined with the show's dark tone and look, it gives it this atmospheric dreamlike haze that's a little hypnotizing, and it makes it just a little easier to buy into this bizarre world. However, there's one character that sticks out like a turd in snow, and that's Tony Twist, voiced by James Keane. All I hear is Mr. Green from Hey Arnold, and I can't unhear it. He is the complete opposite of everything I just said. He is over the top, no subtlety, just 100% a cartoon character.
What the fuck?
Like a lot of comic book properties that come to be adapted into TV shows or movies, unfortunately Spawn suffered through the hassle that is rewrites. After doing an awesome job with Season 1 of adapting Spawn's origin and introducing us to his supporting cast and giving us a good idea of what this world was going to be about, HBO was not happy with the direction Season 2 was going, so they ordered rewrites after the animation was done. So this forced the crew to recycle bits of animation and to try their best to sync the rewritten dialogue to the way lips were flapping on screen. And I can only imagine how much of a pain in the ass that was. Sadly for Season 3, things weren't looking much brighter. Undoubtedly, this is the weakest season of the bunch. They must have known they were on the brink of being cancelled because they just started shoving a whole bunch of shit into this season. In the first 2 seasons, we had a good balance of the grounded stuff like serial killers and Terry Fitzgerald running from the government, and the supernatural stuff that comes with Spawn and the Violator. But in Season 3, we get vampires out of nowhere, and don't get me wrong, I love me some sexy vampires. But this is completely out of left after getting mob bosses and drug dealers, and they don't bother to explain where this sexy vampire came from. Jason Wynn is also now obsessed with this war mask that has superpowers infused into it. It's not that I think these elements can't work in Spawn. I mean, we have a lanky lizard demon in the first few episodes, but the way these things were executed in the first 2 seasons felt more consistent with the rest of the show's tone. In Season 3, there's just no setup, and it feels like they just go for it because they know they have to get to a climax because they have to wrap shit up. But the weirdest thing is when Spawn discovers he has the ability to shapeshift by enveloping himself in his red cape. And I mean, this is a thing he can do in the comics. Like, that's not the problem. I actually like how they do it in the animated show, where he sort of cocoons himself in his red cape and he emerges in a new form. Whereas in the comics, he just does a big green blast of necroplasm and he's suddenly a white guy. But he decides to turn into Terry Fitzgerald, who was his best friend and the guy Wanda, Al Simmons' former wife, marries after Al Simmons dies. And Spawn decides to invade this lovely couple's home, disguised as Terry, and sleeps with Wanda? That's rape. Now, I know that Spawn is not exactly a superhero. He's a flawed man, you know? The line between good and bad is very blurred in this world. But that's a very clear bad, my friend. This happens in the comics, but it's a villain that does it, not our protagonist that we're supposed to be rooting for. Why? Not only that, but he impregnates Wanda with a demon baby. A hellspawn's hellspawn. How can he even reproduce? Isn't he like a zombie? Is necroplasm like green cum? And you thought Peter Parker was bad with his radioactive cum. This is just fucked. So now Wanda is carrying this demon child that's supposed to decide the fate of Armageddon. And this might have been the whole reason why Spawn was sent back to Earth to implant this demon child. Was all this planned? And by the way, none of this is resolved. It doesn't go anywhere. This is the last episode. What a monumental thing to add when shit's ending. The show ends on a huge cliffhanger with Spawn deciding he wants to reclaim his humanity. Now the show of course has been off the air for over 2 decades, so don't hold your breath for the resolution. Todd McFarlane has claimed time and time again over the years that there is a revival for Spawn in an animated show being worked on, but more of a reboot rather than a continuation of the HBO show. And I think it would be kind of a missed opportunity to not pick up where we left off. There's a space for a more adult-oriented animated show. And with the show being available to you on HBO Max, you can easily get caught up. But will it actually happen? Yes. I believe that with your support for Spawntember, anything is possible. The new movie? Absolutely. More shitty video games? Hell yeah! Tweet at Todd McFarlane, use the hashtag, hell, make your own Spawntember video. I got some of my boys in on it. Josh from Panels to Pixels, Maddie from the Game Show UK, Matt Draper. Like, subscribe, and look forward to more Spawn content. Hashtag Spawntember. Good night, everyone.